We will be beginning shortly. Hello, I'd like to welcome you to ICANN's webinar entitled 2013 RAA Registrar-Registrant Agreement and the New Compliance Certificate Requirement. Today's session will last for approximately 45 minutes, and our presenter is Caitlin Tubergen, Registrar Relations and Contracts Manager. Additional ICANN staff is also on hand to help answer any questions that are submitted by you via the Q&A pod, and we will answer as many as time permits. Should we run out of time, or if you have additional questions after the session, please send them to raaquestions@icann.org. This session is being recorded, and links to the presentation materials will be delivered to the registrar mailing list following the webinar. And now I'd like to hand you over to Caitlin Tubergen.
Hello, everyone. We will begin by going over an agenda of the webinar. So to begin, we'll go over an overview of changes to the Registrar-Registrant Agreement under the 2013 RAA, otherwise known as the Registrar-Registered Nameholder Agreement. Then we will take a look in detail at Section 3.7.7 of the agreement. Next, we will look at the compliance certificate requirement, which can be found in Section 3.15 or 3.15 of the agreement. And then we will have a time for Q&A, question and answer. If you have a question during the webinar, please feel free to submit it via the Q&A pod. We're going to try something a little different this time, in that when you submit a question to the Q&A pod, an ICANN staff member will acknowledge receipt, and then the question will be viewable to all participants in the webinar in their Q&A pod. So without further ado, we'll begin. I'm going to go over some highlights to the Registrar-Registered Nameholder Agreement under the 2013 RAA. First, Section 3.7.7 of the agreement provides that registered nameholders must be a person or legal entity that is separate from the registrar. The 2013 RAA also adds the requirement that the registrar must use commercially reasonable efforts to enforce compliance with the provisions of the agreement related to registered nameholders and all ICANN consensus policies. All registration agreements between registrars and registered nameholders must contain sections 3.7.7.1 to 3.7.7.12 of the 2013 RAA. Also, sections 3.7.7.1 through 3.7.7.3 have a terminology change, and so in the 2009 agreement, the word promptly was used in relation to the requirements found in 3.7.7.1 through 3.7.7.3, and the word promptly has now been changed to within 7 days. So now there is a measurable time requirement in the 2013 agreement. So now we will look at the agreement Section 3.7.7 in more detail. Again, registered nameholders must be a person or legal entity that is separate from the registrar. and that requirement can be found in Section 3.7.7 of the agreement. There is a limited exception where the registrar can be the registered name holder, and that exception is defined for domains registered for the purpose of conducting its registrar services. And registrars who do show up as the registered name holder under this exception must submit to Section 3.7.7.1 to 3.7.7.12 of the agreement. And as you can see in the second bullet point, Registrar Services is capitalized, which means it's a defined term in the agreement. That term can be found in Section 1.19 of the RAA, or Section 1.19. And Registrar Services is defined in the agreement as services subject to the RAA provided by a registrar in connection with a gTLD, including contracting with registered name holders, collecting registration data about the registered name holders, and submitting registration information for entry in the registry database. I will now go over an example of the limited exception in 3.7.7 of when a registrar can be a registered name holder. The example is if ICANN operates a registrar and ICANN chooses to register the name ICANN.com through its own registrar. ICANN.com is a domain name that ICANN's registrar uses to provide registrar services, or a platform where customers can buy domain names. Then this would be acceptable under the exception in 3.7.7. If ICANN chooses to register this domain name through its registrar, ICANN must then submit to the provisions in 3.7.7.1 through 3.7.7.12 of the agreement. Some other details found in Section 3.7.7. First, agreements can be paper or electronic, and this will depend on the registrar's jurisdiction and what agreements are deemed as legally enforceable in the registrar's jurisdiction. Additionally, registrars shall use commercially reasonable efforts to enforce compliance with the provisions of the registration agreement between the registrar and any registered name holder that relate to implementing the requirements of subsections 3.7.7.1 through 3.7.7.12 or any consensus policy. And a couple of registrars have written in to ask if ICANN can define what commercially reasonable means. And commercially reasonable will be determined on a case-by-case basis. Some additional changes that I previously mentioned refer to sections 3.7.7.1 through 3.7.7.3 of the agreement, and that deals with the changing of the word promptly to within 7 days. So section 3.7.7.1 provides that the registered name holder shall provide to registrar accurate and reliable contact details and correct and update them within 7 days of any change during the term of the registered name registration, including the full name, postal address, email address, voice telephone number, and fax number, if available, of the registered name holder. So again, the difference is that promptly has been changed to a measurable amount of time, and that is 7 days. And 7 days is 7 calendar days. Similarly, in section 3.7.7.2 of the agreement, a registered name holder's willful provision of inaccurate or unreliable information, its willful failure to update information provided to registrar within 7 days of any change, or its failure to respond for over 15 days to inquiries by registrar concerning the accuracy of those contact details associated with the registered name holder's registration shall constitute a material breach of the registered name holder registrar contract and be a basis for suspension and or cancellation of the registered name registration. So again, promptly has been changed to 7 days in the 2013 agreement. And lastly, Section 3.7.7.3 of the agreement provides that any registered name holder that intends to license use of a domain name to a third party is nonetheless the registered name holder of record and is therefore responsible for providing its own full contact information and for providing and updating accurate technical and administrative contact information adequate to facilitate timely resolution of any problems that arise in connection with the registered name. A registered name holder licensing use of a registered name according to this provision must accept liability for harm caused by wrongful use of the registered name unless it discloses the current contact information provided by its licensee and the identity of the licensee within 7 days to a party providing the registered name holder reasonable evidence of actionable harm. I will now briefly go over the compliance certificate requirement, which is a new requirement under the 2013 agreement. The compliance certificate requirement can be found in Section 3.15 of the agreement, and it says that registrar shall complete and deliver to ICANN on a schedule and in a form specified by ICANN from time to time in consultation with registrars, a registrar self-assessment. Registrar shall complete and deliver to ICANN within 20 days following the end of each calendar year a certificate executed by the President, Chief Executive Officer, or CEO, Chief Financial Officer, or CFO, or Chief Operating Officer, or COO, or their equivalents of registrar, certifying compliance with the terms and conditions of this agreement. This is done in the form of a compliance certificate. The form specified by ICANN is provided as the compliance certificate. It can be found in number 11 in the table of contents of the agreement. And again, it must be signed by registrar's President, Chief Executive Officer, Chief Financial Officer, Chief Operating Officer, or the equivalent. And this must be completed within 20 days following the end of each calendar year. So at the end of the calendar year, the Registrar Services team will be sending this compliance certificate, which can be found in the agreement, to all ICANN accredited registrars via our DocuSign, and registrars must return this within 20 days following each calendar year, or by January 20th. So thank you for participating in this webinar. We will now open up for Q&A. So if you have a question, please submit it to the Q&A pod at this time. Additionally, the slides have been unsynced or unlocked, and so if any of the participants would like to scroll through the slides, you're welcome to do so at this time.
Okay, we're having some questions come through, and we'll be answering them shortly. Okay, as you can see, the questions are now being posted in the Q&A pod. So our first question is, regarding future webinars, can we expect an in-depth session on the WHOIS verification validation requirements?
Thank you for the question, James. And the answer to that question is yes. The next webinar in this series, and actually the last webinar in this series, will be held on Thursday, October 31st at 15 o'clock UTC, and the topic will be the Registrar Data Directory Services, or WHOIS specification, and the WHOIS accuracy specification.
Do we have to issue such compliance certificate for 2013? We're going to come back to that question. We're just looking for the answer. The next one is, how does ICANN define the term wrongful use in section 3.7.7.3? Okay, so whilst we wait for the answer on that one, going back to the previous question, do we have to issue such compliance certificate for 2013?
The CEO certification is effective upon the effective date of the agreement or the signature of the agreement. So yes, that will be something that will have to be provided from when the agreement is signed or becomes effective through the rest of the calendar year.
Okay, in regard to the question about section 3.7.7.3, we'll get back to you on that one after the webinar. Where can I download this presentation and where can I access all webinars about RAA 2013?
Thank you for the question, Marcus. This is Caitlin Tibergen. Shortly following the webinar, I send an email to the registrar mailing list, which includes links to download the slides from the presentation and an audio recording of the presentation. And I can send you individually the previous links if you didn't receive them.
Would you please further clarify Section 3.7.7.1? Does the 7-day requirement start upon the registrar's receipt of such change in information, or are just supposed to somehow know that the information has changed?
This is Owen Smigelski. That 7-day requirement is upon the registered name holder. However, if the registrar does become aware of that, then at that point the 7-day requirement would start for the registrar.
Can we submit one single compliance certificate for a family of co-owned registrars?
Thank you for the question, James. We will look into doing batching for this. At this point, it's a logistical question, and we haven't officially sent out the compliance certificate, but we will take that under advisement, so thank you for the suggestion.
Please explain again regarding the domain names a registrar owns.
This is Owen Smigelski. Regarding the domain names that a registrar owns, 3.7.7 specifies that a registrar must enter into an agreement with an entity other than the registrar or an individual, except for the provision of Registrar Services. Registrar Services is defined in 1.19 of the RAA. It's a defined term, and that gives a list of things that are registrar services, which includes contracting with registered name holders, collecting registration data about the registered name holders, and submitting registration information for entry into the registry database. It does not include things that are not provision of registrar services, such as a web hosting company, which may be independent from that. So if the registrar is using it for those defined services, they do not have to enter into a registration agreement.
Are we okay with leaving promptly or similar language in our agreements to give us some more leeway of when we may do something regarding the registration?
This is Owen Smigelski. Volker, you need to have the wording that's in the RAA. That's changed from promptly to 7 days. Those terms do need to be incorporated in your agreement.
Okay, that's the last of the questions. So if you have any more, please go ahead and submit them now. So we have a question. So ICANN is barring registrars from owing domains that are not providing registration-related services.
This is Owen Smigelski. Yes, this is mentioned in the 2013 RAA, when was also the same similar wording and understanding in the 2009 RAA.
Just as a clarification here, is that 7 days or 7 working days?
Thank you for the question, Wayne. The answer to that question is it's 7 calendar days.
Is the ICANN IANA registrar list current as to who signed the 2013 RAA? If not, when will it be updated?
Thank you for the question, James. The answer to that question is that this database is updated overnight, so it should be current.
Okay, we currently have no more questions. If you'd like to submit one, please do so. We have a question. Are we going to receive a notification each year to provide an updated compliance certificate, or are we supposed to send it proactively?
Thank you for that question. The answer is that the compliance certificate will be sent to the registrars through the Registrar Services team. So when you receive the compliance certificate, that will put you on notice that you need to respond to the compliance certificate within 20 days following the end of each calendar year. The compliance certificate will be sent to the primary contact of the registrar.
Question was posted, this is Owen Smigelski, about how many registrars have actually signed the 2013 RAA. As of Tuesday, the number was 53, and according to Registrar Services, there are about a similar number that have requested signature that are in process.
We have a question. Is marketing promoting Registrar Services a registrar service in itself?
This is Owen Smigelski. Volker, I would refer back to section 1.19, which defines registrar services, and if the marketing and promotion of the registrar also facilitates those other items on there, such as contracting with the registrar name holder, collecting information, or sending it to a registry, then yes, it would qualify. But just on its own, only marketing or only promoting without providing any of those registrar services, then no, that would not qualify.
There are currently no additional questions in the Q&A, so we'll keep the Q&A pod open for about 5 more minutes to see if anyone thinks of any questions. And if nothing is received, we will end the webinar early. Thank you.
Okay, just to make sure you're all still awake, we have another question. Can a reseller fulfill the requirement for a contract with the registered name holder?
Hi, Andy. This is Owen Smigelski. It seems you're asking is, can the reseller obtain the contract with the registered name holder in place of the registrar doing that? I'm going to answer it that way. If that's not what your question is, please do let us know. Yes, the reseller can obtain the registration agreement with the registered name holder on behalf of the registrar. But to stress, that contract must be with the registered name holder and between the registrar.
Seeing as there are no more questions, we are going to conclude this webinar. Thank you for participating, and thank you again to the ICANN staff members who helped answer questions during this session. Our next webinar will be held on Thursday, October 31st at 15 o'clock UTC. This will be the last webinar in this current 2013 RAA series, and the topic will be the Registrar Data Directory Services Specification, also known as the WHOIS specification, and the WHOIS accuracy specification, and we hope you will participate. Thank you again.